Oh, okay. I thought you said you had.
No, no. So,
Okay.
There we go. I'm back. Hi. I was logged in as
Hi.
Can't see you. I can't see you.
I can.
I can.
I can.
Oh, Mary, you don't need to see me. You know what I look like.
That's true.
Let me share the screen real fast. Sorry, we were talking about the land of Nod, and let me just get my screen ready. Here we go. All right. Yeah, Sarah sent me this, and we were talking about the lands outside of Eden a few sessions ago. From Robert Louis Stevenson, The Land of Nod. Here, let me read it. I love this.
I love that poem.
Isn't it great? It makes me want to sleep, too. From breakfast on all through the day, at home among my friends I stay, but every night I go abroad, afar into the land of Nod. All by myself I have to go, with none to tell me what to do, and all alone beside the streams and up the mountainsides of dreams. The strangest things are there for me, both things to eat and things to see, and many frightening sights abroad till morning in the land of Nod. Try as I like to fight the way, I never can get back by day, nor can remember plain and clear the curious music that I hear.
Nice.
Really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And now let's try this. I'm going to share my screen. I've got slides. Play from start. All right. You can see that, I hope?
Yep.
Yes.
You've got a screen? Great. All right, we are back. I'm going to, before we get into it, take a little bit of a pause and just help you kind of anticipate some things that are coming up by talking about Hebrew, the text. So before I get to that, hang on. Wait a minute, where'd it go? Where'd my slide go? Hold on, we'll come back. Hey, there it is. It's out of order. All right. This is a great book called The Book of Letters. This talks about the Hebrew alphabet. Like a Hebrew Bible, it's written backwards to forwards. So it's really cool. And this is, he basically takes each letter and kind of does a little meditation on each letter, because the meanings of the letters have just like their words have so many multiple meanings. And there's a lot going on beyond just, you know, a letter on a page. And so this letter, Aleph, is the first letter. It would be the closest equivalent to the letter A in our alphabet. And I just thought I would read a little bit of this to you, because I find it helpful too. So Aleph is the first letter. It has no sound, only the sound you make when you begin to make every sound. Open your mouth and begin to make a sound, and stop, and that is Aleph. It is the letter that begins the first of God's mysterious 70 names, such as Elohim, God. It also begins the most important thing about God: know that God is one, Echad, one, the first and the last, and the only one. The name of the first person was Adam, beginning with Aleph. The first man. The name of the herald of the last man will be Elijah. That begins with Aleph. The name of the first Jew is also beginning with an Aleph. Avram or Avraham, as we're about to meet in Genesis. Aleph is the letter of fire. A fire which flames does not destroy. That is how the Holy One gets your attention. He shows you the primordial fire. And the very first letter of the first word of the first command begins with the first letter, which has no sound, Aleph, in Anaki. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of slavery. It is no accident that all these words begin with Aleph. The most basic words there are begin with the most primal sound there is, the almost sound. you make before you make any sound. That is Aleph. All right. Let me do a little recap. We talked last time about kind of the aftermath of the flood. We talked about the shame upon Ham and how the descendants of Ham may or may not have been early Africans, probably geographically, definitely, which kind of leads to our early prejudices. And we talked a little bit about genealogies. We're about to breeze through one again that will be used as a storytelling device that you would lend authenticity to the story you're telling by reciting the genealogies and how the people are connected by a family tree. But it is also what I call a montage making, like you would see in a movie, just the passage of time. I don't know if anybody's been watching the Michael Jordan documentary. The ESPN documentary was really good, but they do this cool trick where they pass back and forth through time, telling a story. They'll be in 1998 and then they'll swivel back to 1987 or something. And you see actually a little dial, like an old radio in a car, kind of swing left or right. That's kind of what a genealogy is doing in the Bible as well. And then we ended with the Tower of Babel, which we'll just visit on a little bit again, and it's my background, if you can see on my screen. The Babel Tower takes us into the end of what's called the primeval history, basically the kind of the beginnings of creation and the spread of humanity, and we're switching into a new section today. And just one final thing on Babel, it is connected with the word of the place Babylon, which is not a good place whenever Babylon comes up in the Bible. And it is supposed to sound like it sounds like the word or the phrase Babylon. It's like the Babylons, the enemies, they make no sound. No sound that makes sense at least. All right. And the story of the Tower of Babel, if you remember, is about the limits of humanity. The tower goes up to the heavens. It's about how the humans want to get close to God, and so they build a tower that takes them up to God's presence side by side. But as they get up there, God confuses the languages so that they can't communicate. It's kind of like a trust fall gone horribly wrong. And that's supposed to be the origins of the spread of different tribes and languages in antiquity. One second. Please don't be offended. A few of you I muted because there was some echoing going on. So if you want to speak, just make sure you're unmuted or wave a hand and I'll see you too. It is supposed to be, remember we talked a lot about how you tell an origin story. So the origin making explains why, at least for the Hebrews' sake, because this is their story, why humans speak in different languages. This is the origin of it. And it's attributed to something God has done, arguably, as some kind of punishment. And funny enough, this is just one of those eerie timing things, that Tower of Babel story is always paired with the Pentecost story, which happens to be this coming Sunday. So you will hear again the story of Babel this coming Sunday from Genesis. Why they're paired together has to do with language, because as we know from the Pentecost story, that's where all the disciples speak in tongues. I'm going to say more about that in a second. And then I thought it was worth pausing. Let me pause for some water. All right. This is always a good time, especially when we're in the Old Testament, and because your brain is going to want to go there, to just take a moment and ponder fact and truth. I hesitate to say fact versus truth, because humans in the 21st century, honestly, humans in the 20th century, the 19th century, want to find fact in something that never meant to be a fact-finding mission. That would be the Bible. So we're always going to look at it thinking, how does this line up with history or facts or chronology or timelines? And that's a question that we're asking that none of these people had on their minds whatsoever. Instead, I definitely encourage you to think about what's the truth of what's being said here, because that will be something we can relate to. So here's what I mean. And this sounds a little bit like we're in a philosophy seminar, right? So let me try to break it down and give you some examples of what we've already studied here. So fact, the flood, or is it? The flood was God wiping the slate clean. And we all know people of different Christian traditions who think that's exactly what happened, right? Fact by fact, the flood was punishment. The truth, however, might be that weather and the earth will inexplicably, that's one of my favorite words, lay waste, and God is in the rebuilding. Or, as Pam texted me on Saturday, the rainbow. After that, we had a horrible storm on Saturday, and it left some magnificent rainbows behind. And can somebody say what the rainbow means from the flood story?
God's promise.
That's right. The covenant. Beautiful.
And it was shaped like a dome. I mean, it was just,
Yeah, it was.
oh, it was
Really
Okay.
old.
Yes. Yeah, it was beautiful, Pam. Thank you for sending that.
yeah.
Here's another one. Fact, Ham, the son of Noah, saw his father, remember, in some compromising or sexually embarrassing way. And yet Ham is the one who's shamed, and all of his descendants. The truth of really what's going on, which I was arguing, is that the way we tell origin stories of our enemies, which is who the people of Ham are, according to this, the people that tell this story, it's often biased or skewed to shame them. And that's how that story comes to be. Another example, humans built a tower to God and he punished them by scrambling their languages. And again, there are people who believe that's the God's honest truth of what happened. The truth is that humans move in tribes naturally. We have our own languages and traditions. The Pentecost story, which we'll hear on Sunday, and I can say this now because I'm not the preacher, Rita is, so I'll give you a mini sermon. The Pentecost story reminds us that God wants us to find ways to communicate to each other. So I think one of the beautiful things about what happens in the Pentecost story is not about speaking tongues on fire and the confusion. It's that the disciples are now given the ability in this early stage of forming the church to now understand foreign languages, which had not been present until that point. Do you see the kind of connection between the two? Yeah. So no longer confusion. Now we have the ability to actually see where other people are coming from, which is really beautiful. All right. Just any questions on what we had been through already before? Tower of Babel, flood, anything? Or any comments, anybody? Okay. We're now entering a new phase in Genesis.
I have a comment.
Yes, Chris, go ahead.
So that puts a really different spin on the Old Testament.
Yes. Hopefully a good spin.
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you do all this kind of stuff in seminary? Is that where?
That's where I first heard a lot of this. Yeah.
Having a class doing this kind of sort of in-depth fact versus truth of the Old Testament would probably be a really good thing.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah, and I will say this fact versus truth thing is kind of my pet project. I borrowed it from Indiana Jones. I meant to bring a clip, actually. There's an episode, one of the Indiana Jones movies, he writes, archaeology is a search for facts. And then he says, if you're looking for truth, that's the philosophy class down the hall. But there is something to that, it's, and what's great about the Indiana Jones movies is that he becomes embroiled in some things that may or may not be true. The Ark and the Holy Grail. But yeah, I think it's just always worth delving into, especially if you start to have problems with the text. So if you're looking at the text and you're going, oh, God sounds angry, or why are we being punished? All of these things, it's good to take a step back and be like, what is the point of this story? And in the telling of the story is some kind of truth about humans that may give us truth about God, or may just tell us a bit about who we are. And they're both valuable. It's just a good reminder too, that even, kids take it for granted, and some adults, but the history books always have a bias, a slant, what they tell or don't tell, no matter who writes them. And people always say they don't have a bias, but you do. You're a human being. You all have a point of view and a bias, your story you're trying to tell. And case in point, I'm sure that, I grew up in Virginia, and half of the things, Illinois is the same way. Half of the things are named for Native American tribes there. The Powhite Parkway, Powhatan, Cherokee Road, all these places I grew up around. We never in Virginia history classes talked about what happened to the Native Americans that we displaced in colonial America. That is always conveniently left out. Instead, we're talking about John Rolfe and John Smith and Sir Walter Raleigh. Those are the heroes. And the Bible does the same thing. It talks about, from a pointed perspective, about people that are their heroes, and clearly who the enemies are. So it's always good to just kind of take a pause. But anyway. Right. We are in a period now called the ancestral period. And this section of the story, and this painting is Rembrandt, and it is an angel, or angels talking to Abraham, or Abram, I should say. He's going to be Abram for a little while here. And this is the story of the patriarchs and matriarchs of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. They all begin here. This is not, again, it's not quite saddled up to history. The history of these people is questionable. I always think a good rule of thumb is when we get in the Bible to King David, that's where we kind of sync up to modern history, or not modern, but history, real history of the world. Until then, a lot of this is legend and kind of a conflating multiple people. And still part of the storytelling, but an incredibly important part to the identity of ancient Israel, especially. And this is the story, what we're about to get into, of Abram and Sarai. And we have a Sarah in our group here, so we don't have any Abrahams, but we do have little Abraham Hermanson. And we're going to get to why their names are renamed. We probably will not get that far today, but these are relatively short chapters. So I'm going to start by reading, we'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to read the lineage here. This is chapter 11, and we're on verse 10, if you want to grab a Bible or just sit back and listen. And I'm reading a new translation that none of you have, and then we'll switch it up and have other people read different translations. But I'll power through, since it's the hard names, and I know that stresses everybody out. Here we go. This is a genealogy to show both the passage of time and to lead us up to the next important character. This is the lineage of Shem. Shem is one of the other sons of Noah. Shem was 100 years old when he begot Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after begetting Arpachshad 500 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Arpachshad lived 35 years, and he begot Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after begetting Shelah 403 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Shelah lived 30 years, and he begot Eber. And Shelah lived after begetting Eber 403 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Eber lived 34 years, and he begot Peleg. And Eber lived after begetting Peleg 430 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years, and he begot Reu. And Peleg lived after begetting Reu 209 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Reu lived 32 years, and he begot Serug. And Reu lived after begetting Serug 207 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Serug lived 30 years, and he begot Nahor. And Serug lived after begetting Nahor 200 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Nahor lived 29 years, and he begot Terah. And Nahor lived after begetting Terah 119 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And Terah lived 70 years until he begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Okay. Now verse 27. And this is the lineage of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. So that would be Abram's nephew. That Lot is going to be an important character too. And Haran died in the lifetime of Terah, his father, in the land of his birth, Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took themselves wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. And Sarai was barren. She had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot, son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, the wife of his son Abram. And he set out with them from Ur of the Chaldees towards the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and settled there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And that's all we need to know about Terah. So they kind of sew it up with a little bow there, that lineage. And now we get to chapter 12, and it's like we're at bird's eye view, and now we're going to zoom in on one character in all of that. Just curious, did any particular sentence crop up as curious to you or unusual in that lineage? Anything stick out to anybody? It's okay if it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's all easy to have your eyes glaze over hearing all that too.
I will say that they all give birth at age 30.
Yeah, there is a definitely,
Except for one person gave birth at age 29.
yeah, and they keep going. Now, do notice their lifespans are getting shorter and shorter, almost to real humans at a certain point. I actually was looking at line 31, where they mentioned Sarah, and there is kind of like an aside that seems to have nothing to do with the, seems at first because she's not a man. And it says, and Sarai was barren and she had no child. And why would they bring that up? Because it's a bit of foreshadowing. This is going to become critical to the story of Sarah, that she is barren up until this point. And it's important here because it's a negative thing. As you probably could guess, ladies, that in antiquity, if you couldn't bear children, I hate to say it this way, but what good were you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a mark against her and against Abram that they can't bear children. They felt that, almost believing there's some kind of curse on them, right? But you don't need me to tell you that there's a rainbow at the end of that story, so to speak. Now, would anyone like to read chapter 12 from their Bible? Just 1 to 9 is kind of its own section. There's a few tough words, but I believe in you, whoever it may be.
I can try it.
All right, Sarah. Great.
Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house and to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse. And by you all the families of the earth shall bless themselves. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions which they had gathered, and the persons that they had gotten in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come through the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Morah. And at that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to you descendants I'll give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. Thence he removed the mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and called on the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negev. You want me to keep going?
No, that's good. Pause right there. On this map, I just realized that Canaan is not visible, so I'm going to do a separate search. But I wanted you to see By the way, this is always comes up in Jeopardy for some reason. So if you're a Jeopardy obsessionist like me, you want to remember is where Abram is from. And it's way over. This is a lot of distance. This would be modern day Iraq. Oops, did not need to go backwards. There we go. And there's Babylon. Some other towns important. So this is a long distance for them. Oh my goodness. Sorry, my mouse is sensitive. I'm looking up Canaan because I can't remember where Canaan is. Oh, Canaan is the whole region. Duh. It's this whole area for now. Okay, there we go. Fabulous. Bethel, fun with Hebrew. Bethel, B-E or B-E-T is the next Hebrew letter Beit, or the letter B, sometimes pronounced as a V. So you'll hear Avram or Abram for Abraham. Anyway, Beit means house, and El means God. So house of God, Bethel. Bethlehem does not mean God, house of God. Lahem means bread or life. So house of bread or house of life, just so you're wondering.
It's interesting because both those names are always in both Christian churches and Jewish synagogues have the name Bethel.
Exactly.
Bethel Synagogue or Bethel Lutheran Church.
Exactly right. It's like if you're going to name a church or a temple, why not start with House of God? That sounds pretty good.
It's the House of God Church.
It's kind of like in an Episcopal church calling a church Christ Church. It's like, all right, that's pretty clever, I guess. Yeah.
Or downtown Chicago, Auditorium Theater, or whatever it's called. Stupid name.
All right, who would like to read from their Bible? Well, let me just say real fast. The most important thing to take away here is that God is calling Abraham. So I don't want to say God is like dormant during these previous generations between Noah and Abram, but God hasn't felt the need to intercede or intervene until this point. And now God is deciding to do something with Abram.
And Greg, what's the timeline from the flood to now when you say you think God's kind of been dormant?
Great question. According to my notes, if you added it all up, it's a period of about 365 years.
Oh, wow.
But I think it's long. It should be more than that. It should be generations. So it's
isn't it? Don't we add up what you just read earlier, Greg, with everybody living for?
I think you do. Yeah.
Oh,
that's way more than 300.
It's way more than 365.
Some people live 300 years.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what my note is. But anyway, my book says 365. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, a long time has passed. And now God is intervening, but it's important to note that God is asking Abram to do something, but without much specifics. And Abram does it, and that is move from Ur to Canaan. And he does it, and then to boot, he builds an altar to God to worship God. So there you go. By the way, the phrase in my book, it says, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And what I mean is, God, you want to ask God, like, how exactly are you going to do that? That's what the Episcopal Church names a variant on that. It's what our same-sex marriage rights are called. I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. It's kind of a book of supplemental marriage rights. So there you go. Fun fact. Okay, verse 10 to the end of the chapter. Would anyone like to read from their Bible?
I have the Message. I'll do the Message if people want to hear that.
Great, let's do it.
Okay. Then a famine came to the land. Abram went down to Egypt to live. It was a hard famine. As he drew near to Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarah, look, we both know that you're a beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they're going to say, that's his wife, and kill me. But they'll let you live. Do me a favor. Tell them you're my sister. Because of you, they'll welcome me and let me live. When Abram arrived in Egypt, the Egyptians took one look and saw that his wife was stunningly beautiful. Pharaoh's princess raved over her to Pharaoh. She was taken to live with Pharaoh. Because of her, Abram got along very well. He accumulated sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, men and women servants, and camels. But God hit Pharaoh hard because of Abram's wife, Sarai. Everybody in the palace got seriously sick. Pharaoh called for Abram. "What's this that you've done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She's my sister,' so that I take her as my wife? Here's your wife back. Take her and get out." Pharaoh ordered his men to get Abram out of the country. They sent him and his wife and everything he owned on their way.
All right. Our first sojourn into Egypt, and it's not a pleasant place. That's foreshadowing also. So by this point in time, there's now Egyptians and there's a Pharaoh. And you have this this isn't the first time this isn't the last time this is going to happen, but you get a little bit of a window into this ancient dynamics of wives and how the possession of women, and how Abram says, "I've got to pretend you're my sister," in order to, I guess, please Pharaoh, right? And it all becomes a big problem. And so the Pharaoh, this is my interpretation of this, is this is the first time of many, especially in Genesis, where there's going to be a tension and kind of a duplicity of the Egyptians, who are enemies, right? Descendants of and Pharaoh. Where this is really going to go south is with Abraham's great-grandson, who was Joseph. Yes, that Joseph, the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I'm just looking at my notes here, but definitely a strange story. All right, let's just move on.
Isn't it kind of surprising that he just didn't kill him at that point?
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if, the Pharaoh realizes that there's something about Abraham, that he's blessed somehow, and that if he were to do anything else to him, even worse things would happen. Again, this is going to it's going to echo back with Joseph when there's the plagues that come down, like the locusts, the frogs, that kind of thing. This Pharaoh, this is generations before, is clearly spooked and says, take your wife back. And then they're off. So, chapter 13. Anyone like to read? We could go all 1 to 12, maybe. These are short chapters. All right, I'll go.
I can read.
Oh, okay. Who's that? Susan?
Yeah, and I have I have the message out today.
Oh, good. Message is great.
So Abram left Egypt and went back to the Negev, he and his wife and everything he owned, and Lot still with him. By now, Abram was very rich, loaded with cattle and silver and gold. He moved from Negev, camping along the way, to Bethel, the place he had first set up his tent, between Bethel and Ai, and built his first altar. Abram prayed there to God. Lot, who was traveling with Abram, was also rich in sheep and cattle and tents, but the land couldn't support both of them, and they had too many possessions. They couldn't both live there. Quarrels broke out between Abram's shepherds and Lot's shepherds. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living on the land at the time. Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have fighting between us, between your shepherds and my shepherds. After all, we're family. Look around. Isn't there plenty of land out there? Let's separate. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left." Lot looked. He saw the whole plain of the Jordan spread out, well watered. This was before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like God's garden, like Egypt, and stretching all the way to Zor. Lot took the whole plain of the Jordan. Lot set out to the east. That's how they came to part company. uncle and nephew. Abram settled in Canaan. Lot settled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent near Sodom. The people of Sodom were evil, flagrant sinners against God. After Lot separated from him, God said to Abram, "Open your eyes, look around, look north, south, east, and west. Everything you see, the whole land spread out before you. I will give to you and your children forever. I will make your descendants like dust. Counting your descendants will be as impossible as counting the dust of the earth. So, on your feet, get moving. Walk through the country, its length and breadth. I'm giving it all to you." Abram moved his tent. He went and settled by the oaks of Mamre in Hebron. There he built an altar to God.
Right. Thank you, Susan. So let me just point out a couple things and then pause for some questions. There's a, and I love the way the message said it. This is how they came to be parted, I think, from one another. So clearly in the storytelling, there is a legend, there was a cataclysmic separation of tribes, really, of this family when Lot and Abram went their separate ways. And the very next thing that happens to Lot is he goes to the town of Sodom, and it says the people of Sodom were evil offenders against the Lord. So if you were a betting person, how is this going to end for Lot? Lot has clearly made the wrong choice somehow. Most of you know where we're going with Sodom and Gomorrah, and the text even alludes to it, the Lord's destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And I'm going to have fun with that passage when we get to it, but we're still a ways off. For now, Abram is now in a place in Canaan, which is kind of that modern Israel-ish area, roughly, that kind of box there. And I thought this was fun. What's going on here where basically the Lord is telling him, by the way, we have no clue how the Lord is talking to him at all. It's just, they're not specific here. And God says, walk about the land through its length and its breadth. For to you, this is my translation, for to you I will give it. In these kind of ancient times, when you procured land, like you bought property, the way you kind of sealed the deal was to walk around the perimeter of the property and just kind of almost like inspecting it, as you kind of would if you bought a car and you kind of like walk around, or maybe even a rental car, and just kind of check it for damage. And then, a handshake, or these days an elbow. And that's kind of saying, once you do this walk around, Abram, the land is yours. And this will be the kind of fertile ground from which I will, the classic text, and what my text has is talks about seed. And it means literally seed, and it also means metaphorically seed. But, now settle and start having children. But there's still a problem. And the text doesn't say it, but we saw it. Remember, I flagged it in the last chapter. There's still a problem. Sarah can't have children. So the dramatic irony here, if you don't know where the story's going, is, okay, that's great and all, God. Great plan. Beautiful. Thanks for taking care of Pharaoh. But there's still a problem, which is, how are they supposed to have children? And that's going to be the next kind of phase, is how are we going to solve this problem? Does anybody if anybody does not know where the story is going, anybody have any guesses of how you would get around this problem of how to have children? Kind of has a little bit to do with how Pharaoh and Abram treated Sarah when they were in Egypt.
Greg?
Yeah.
Or it used to be that a woman being barren was grounds for annulment in the Catholic Church?
If that's true, it sounds true. I can't say for sure.
I think it was an old one. It used to be, but yeah, so you just get a new wife and have kids.
That sounds right. Yeah. Like the man could be like, well, it's like you bought a defective computer, you can move on. And I say that with, not to be funny. I'm saying it to say this is an abysmal situation, and thank God we're not there anymore. But at the same time, Sarah will prove in the long run to be a really powerful character with a lot of agency. like many of the women of the Bible, which is great. I will only say, because I don't think we're going to have time to get to it today, that the next phase of what you would do to kind of solve this situation of having children, by the way, it's not going to be a problem of what they should have done, which is say, God, can you help us have children? Instead, they try to solve it their own way, and that is by having a surrogate come in and have children for Sarah. And it's not going to go so great. So there's your foreshadowing. Any questions up to this point so far? It is a little bit of a biopic at this stage of this happened and then this happened and then this happened. The next chapter is a bit of a, I'm going to kind of breeze through it here with mine because it's a lot, it's a bit of a sort of a genealogy, but let me just kind of breeze through it real quick, okay? Chapter 14, and it happened in the days of Araphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, oh boy, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim. They made war on Bera, king of Sodom, and Bersha, king of Gomorrah, and Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemabir, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All of them joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Dead Sea. 12 years they had been subject to Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled, and in the 14th year Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and struck down the Rephaim at Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim at Ham, and the Emim at Shava Kirathaim, and the Horites in the high country of Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they swung back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they struck all the territory of the Amalekite and also the Amorite who dwelled in Hazazon Tamar. And the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went forth and joined battle with them in the valley of Siddim with Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against the 5. And the valley of Siddim was riddled with bitumen pits. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled there and leaped into them, while the rest fled into the high country. And the 4 kings took all the substance of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food and went off. And they took Lot, Abram's nephew, and all his substance and went off, for he was then dwelling in Sodom. See, we said this wasn't going to go well for Lot by staying there. And a fugitive came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he was then encamped at the terebinths of Mamre the Amorite, kinsman of Eshcol and Aner, who were Abram's confederates. And Abram heard that his kinsman was taken captive, his nephew. And he marshaled his retainers, natives of his household, 318 of them, and gave chase up to Dan. And he and his servants with him fanned out against them by night, and he struck them and pursued them up to Hobah, which is north of Damascus, which is on your map here. So they're outside of Canaan. And he brought back all the substance, and also Lot, his kinsman, and his substance be brought back. Can I just pause real fast? What did some of your other books say for that word substance? Just curious. Does it say anything like possessions, maybe?
Possessions, yeah.
Substance is a weird translation. I wonder if it means food and things as well. And Lot and his kinsmen and his substance he brought back, and the women and the other people as well. And the king of Sodom went forth to meet him after he came back from striking down Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him to the valley of Shava, that is the valley of the king. And Melchizedek, there's a good name. Melchizedek, king of Salem, that's the progenitor of Jerusalem, brought out bread and wine, for he was a priest to El Elyon. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram to El Elyon, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be El Elyon who delivers your foes into your hand. And Abram gave him a tithe of everything. Ooh, very good parishioner. And beautiful. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I raise my hand in oath to the Lord, the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a single thread or sandal strap of all that is yours, lest you say I have made Abram rich. Nothing for me but what the lads have consumed. And as for the share of men who came with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take, their share. Let me just pause real quick. Melchizedek, this will come up a lot, particularly in the Psalms and poetry. It means righteous king. Zedek or Zadok means king. I'm sorry, that means righteous. Melchiz means king. It suggested to many commentators a line of King David, that there's an agenda in this storytelling that's supposed to be kind of a founder of the people of Israel in this kind of ceremonial, almost a sacramental encounter with the priest king of Jerusalem. They're having a bit of a worship service here, almost like a commissioning. And Abram's taking a pledge in many ways. And the later writers or the formers of this text will have wanted to make a connection to King David to kind of add almost like a priestly blessing into his storyline. So that's where this is all headed. And that's the end of my chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And I don't think there's much more to say. I'm just peeking at 15 to see what is important. I think this will be helpful. Yep. We're going to get right up to the drama of the bearing children. But I think in chapter 15, it'll be interesting because I think Abram starts to kind of ask God, what's the plan here, God? So does anybody, maybe somebody with a different translation, like to read chapter 15? It's short. Oh, it's got some big names though. But I believe in you. Anyone? How about Barbie, want to just read again from the message?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yep. After all these things, the word of God came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I'm your shield. Your reward will be grand. Abram said, God, Master, what use are your gifts as long as I'm childless and Eliezer of Damascus is going to inherit everything? Abram continued, see, you've given me no children, and now a mere house servant is going to get it all. Then God's message came. Don't worry, he won't be your heir. A son from your body will be your heir. Then he took him outside and said, look at the sky, count the stars. Can you do it? Count your descendants. You're going to have a big family, Abram. And he believed God declaring him set right with God. God continued, I'm the same God who brought you from Ur of the Chaldees and gave you this land to own. Abram said, Master God, how am I to know this, that it will all be mine? God said, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, and a dove and a young pigeon. He brought all these animals to him, split them down the middle, and laid the halves opposite each other. But he didn't split the birds. Vultures swooped down on their carcasses, but Abram scared them off. As the sun went down, a deep sleep over came Abram, and then a sense of dread, dark and heavy. God said to Abram, know this, your descendants will live as outsiders in a land not theirs. They'll be enslaved and beaten down for 400 years. Then I'll punish their slave masters. Your offsprings will march out of there loaded with plunder. But not you. You have a long and full life and die a good and peaceful death. Not until the 4th generation will your descendants return here. Sin is still a thriving business among the Amorites. When the sun was down and it was dark, a smoking fire pit and a flaming torch moved between the split carcasses. That's when God made a covenant with Abram. I'm giving this land to your children from the Nile River in Egypt to the river Euphrates in Assyria, the country of the Canaanites, Kenizzites, Kadmonites,
Yeah.
Hittites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephraims, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. Sorry, guys. That was a
Go,
mouthful.
Barb. You go.
Yay, Barb.
Yay, Barb.
Whoa.
You're looking for passwords for like all your apps. These are good passwords.
Greg,
Girgashite. Yes, Susan.
I have the Living Bible with me too, and it's interesting that in the Living Bible, it's always Jehovah. It seems to be.
Okay, yeah.
And the Nile River was the Wadi El Arish.
Yep. Wadi means like a body of water. Jehovah would be the name of God. So in probably if you're looking at another Bible, it should say the Lord all with the little all caps, but like small all caps, which is, so if you're reading in Hebrew, it would say YHWH. That's basically what that means. So in the Living Bible, they're trying to simplify it by saying Jehovah, the Englishized version of Yahweh. In Barb's reading in the Message, they just said Master God or God.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just to even further simplify it. I mean, we're all talking about the same God. It's just different words for it. Let me just kind of put a button on some of this, which is that a very similar God to the God of Eden, that's physically walking around and baking things with dirt. This God there's some business about God. It says the word of the Lord came to him, but then it says he walked him outside and talked to him. You know what I mean? So there's not much detail there, but you're almost led to believe that God is kind of physically present talking to him, like Abraham's looking at God. It's ambivalent. The text is ambivalent about that, but it's very much a God that can have a dialogue with a human being one-on-one. That's a remarkable change from Babel in just a few short chapters, where God says, you can't even come near me, I'm going to confuse your language. Now God and Abraham are having a dialogue. Enough time has passed. And you start to see why God picks Abram, because God enjoys Abram's company. Does it remind you of anybody we've talked about in Genesis so far, of somebody that kind of was a good person that was chosen by God?
Moses?
It will be definitely Moses. I meant who we talked about in Genesis so far.
Oh.
Noah.
Noah, exactly.
Noah. Mm-hmm.
So again, it's another ripple in the story of ancient Israel, that, like the people themselves, God will choose them and believe they are righteous people. Yes, there's a problem with that because it's at the expense of other people's, as Susan talked about last week. The other Susan, sorry. And the text is very much mindful of what's about to come. Even stuff that's not going to come for another book of the Bible, which would be the exile of Israel to Egypt. So it's planting some seeds here, but saying, having the mouth of God say, things are going to get rough for the Israelites in the next few centuries, but you, Abraham, will be taken care of. Which is, again, there's some echoes there of the flood, but it's looking forward into the future a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any kind of final just thoughts or reflections on this? I know it was a lot of, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it is getting us to a point of, I think it's good to end there, because now you see that God is in a specific one-on-one relationship, which, you're right, Barb, is going to be echoed in Moses later, where God has conversations only with Moses. It's still lingering, though, and this is a good kind of cliffhanger for next week, is this problem of how are we going to have, here God pointed to the sky and said, Abram, look at all those stars. This is a familiar concept and passage and in Christian poetry and everything. of looking at the stars, and that'll be your descendants. There's so many you can't count them. And yet Abram is now finally asking, yeah, but how? How are you going to do that? and that's going to be the very next chapter. Is we're going to start this plan to kind of how to manifest children, and it's going to be fun. Any questions, anybody? All right.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye, thanks.
See ya. I'm going to shut this and then reopen it for noonday prayer. Feel free to stick around if you want, okay?
Okay, thank
Okey
you.
doke.
I'll turn on some music. How about that?
That'd be great.
Love it. What do we got? What do we got?